Boom. Welcome to Paper Trails, Part 2 of the Nicholson paper on being the right size revisited.
Here, let me take the time to sit down. I stood at attention when that last graphic came in. It's so awe-inspiring.
Yeah. It I won't go there, but attention, yes. It gets my attention. We gotta come up with some answers in atheism, particularly after that conversation last night on David Neff's channel with Snowflake or Starflake or Sunflake. What's his name? Sunflower.
Yeah, Sunflower. Yeah.
I kind of wish Sunflower would come over and have a one-on-one with me on some of that stuff, but I got a feeling he's a difficult person to talk to, I think, because he did a lot of over-talking last night. So
yeah. That's not cool. Although I feel bad about talking Brian, because it seems like when I did over talk somebody, it was always Brian.
Brian is kind of soft spoken, so
yeah, I hated that. So I thought to myself, well, now since I'm just the quote unquote co-host, I'll just keep my mouth shut through all discussions and monitor the chat and stuff.
Yep.
I've got some. Oh, that's my fault. How can it be my fault? Do you have a tab open?
What do you mean?
I'm hearing myself when I talk. I'm hearing an echo.
No, I do not have a tab open.
Well, I think it's gone now.
Okay. Nope. I'm clear. I could switch monitors and see if
well,
that makes
it went away. So
okay.
Don't know what happened there.
Yeah, I noticed that StreamYard every now and then is doing some kind of a repeat thing. And I've heard it on other channels too, where all of a sudden it'll echo for a little while and then it'll quit.
Yeah, that's weird.
Another one of the many presents from StreamYard. Anyway, so here we go. Am I too big? Oh no, spooky bed hair. Yeah.
What's too big?
That's so creepy. I won't be able to sleep now tonight. I'll have fucking nightmares.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I want my ghosts to be small so they don't overwhelm me with fear.
Yeah. Okay, back to our paper. So I guess we're going to read this thing. We're going to read it together with people and comment on it.
Would you like me to start?
I would like that very much.
Sure. Metaphor number 2, cellular circuits. I did not have
you're fired.
Messing that word up. Okay, cellular circuitry. Another engineering metaphor commonly used by molecular biologists and which is to some extent implied by the genetic program is the notion of cellular circuitry. This is the idea that the programmatic instructions encoded in the genes are carried out in a logical fashion by fixed solid-state circuits inside the cell that mimic the current boards of electronic engineering. The metaphor of cellular circuitry goes beyond that of a genetic program because it argues that computers are not merely functionally analogous to cells and other biological systems, but also structurally analogous. In other words, not only does a cell behave in a programmed way, but its internal architecture also displays the modular organization that is typical of the hardware of an electronic computer. There are two main areas of current research in which the cellular circuitry metaphor is regularly employed. The first is in relation to gene regulation, particularly as it pertains to embryonic development. That's something you've been studying lately.
Yep.
Here, the metaphor provides the conceptual foundation for the understanding of gene regulatory networks. GRNs are comprised of cis regulatory elements. Now, I'm going to pause here and ask you, what is the cis in cis regulatory? What does that mean?
Cis regulatory elements usually means that the regulatory gene is in the same area or chromosome as the gene that it regulates, unless
Okay.
I am. And trans comes from somewhere else. It'll be from like another chromosome or another cell or something on that order. But cis means that it's pretty close. So cis regulatory.
Okay. And I guess this parentheses, which I've read several times and just never made the connection, explains it. I.e.,
and
the reason.
every time I think about that, and every time I want to look it up, so I'm going to look that up just to make damn sure that there aren't some nuances, because I think it's an odd thing to say.
Okay, I will finish this little highlighted section here. I.e.,
Okay.
the regions in the vicinity of each gene that contain the specific sequence motifs at which the regulatory proteins that affect its expression bind, plus the set of genes that encode these specific regulatory proteins. So a motif. Is there a definition for motif, or is that just kind of a literary?
That's another one. Motif and domain is that I have to keep wondering about, because I've heard it used both ways. So a motif, as I've seen it in recent papers, is that little, like those 4 amino acids that hang onto the zinc in the zinc finger would be a motif. That would be like a little tiny area of the protein that does a particular function. So, and domains are, I think, often a little bit bigger than that. And there again, I would look it up. But on cis regulatory elements such as promoters, enhancers, and silencers are regions of non-coding DNA which regulate the transcription of nearby genes. In contrast, transregulatory factors regulate or modify the expression of distant genes by combining with their target sequences. So that would be the distinction. So, and it seems like they could have, I don't know, that's some jargon that you see a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if it's necessary jargon. So anyway, I do like jargon, and I guess it is a quick way to say it, but I'm just wondering why they think it's so important. Well, I guess if there's going to be a recombination event, it's going to combine with its regulators, and I think that's going to make a difference. So anyway. Okay, turning text into audio. Good. Somebody actually likes what we're doing. Okay, where are we?
We're at the bottom of that page. I'm going to shut off Dessel's very kind note there. And thank you, Dessel. We are glad that you like this. Conceptualized through the lens of electronic engineering, GRNs are characterized by or as hierarchical assemblies of modular subcircuits and their interconnections, where each subcircuit is an information processing unit. And of course, he provides support for that statement. That produces a discrete development output, which is defined in terms of the effect it has on the spatial or temporal expression pattern of a particular gene. Importantly, these outputs can be mathematically represented as combinations of Boolean operators and or not, so that the entire GRN can be viewed as a logic processing system made up of distinct computational devices, the functions of which are conditional on their inputs. More support, making these assertions supported assertions and not bare assertions. Just pointing that out for creationists who like to read the abstract and the conclusion and dismiss the content. The GRN for the early development of the sea urchin embryo is shown in figure 2.2, which illustrates just how complex and detailed these models have become, and also just how uncanny and intentional their resemblance to the wiring diagrams of electronic engineering. The first thing to bear in mind when evaluating GRN circuits, that's growth regulatory network, right?
Yep.
circuits is that they include only a fraction of genes, cis-regulatory elements, and proteins involved in the developmental process. So it's only a fraction. Moreover, despite their seemingly robust design, the depicted circuits have rather restrictive predictive capabilities, as their computing power is dependent on the presence of very specific environmental conditions. As so go ahead.
Yeah. Could you pause for a second? Okay, so I looked up the difference between motif and domain, and they said exactly the opposite of what I just said.
Oh,
And I have seen it both ways. So motif is a similar 3D structure conserved among different proteins, and this was the way I originally learned it. That it had to do with like helix turn helix. So it's some sort of a three-dimensional structure. And domains, on the other hand, are regions of a protein that has a specific function and can usually function independently of the rest of the protein. So a domain would be like that little zinc finger grabber, which is just the opposite of what I said. But I just recently read a paper where they switched that around. So beware of that one. But I like this.
Would be like a Walmart that has a McDonald's inside of it working.
That would be, yeah, that'd be the McDonald's would be the domain.
Okay.
And the motif would be the entire layout of the Walmart, or or maybe the layout of just one or two aisles in the Walmart. If you had to walk up one aisle, do a sharp turn, and walk down the other aisle, so you'd have helix turn helix.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You see where I'm going? Okay, so that would be a domain.
From Walmart to gene development. That's amazing.
If immutable's got some background noise, but
do I? Is there background noise?
Yeah, it sounds like you're at the mall.
Are you in the McDonald's domain of your local Walmart?
I am in a Subway.
Okay, they have Subways inside of convenience stores.
Okay, walk up to the counter, give them your credit card, tell them you're buying all the subs for the rest of the day, and tell them to close their doors. So that'll work for us.
I don't think that's going to work, unfortunately.
Well, take your mask off and start coughing. There you go.
You are horrible. You know that?
I'm a bad person. I'm a bad person.
You're despicable.
I was just talking about how I've got this sort of aggravating, I don't know if it's allergies or if it's the fact that I inhale powder twice a day, but I've got this cough and I'm saving it up for when I see somebody without a mask. I'm just going to start coughing like crazy.
And that is powder provided by a legal prescription by a licensed medical care provider.
It's called Spiriva. It comes in a little green pill, and you have a little holder, and you poke a hole in it, and you have to suck it into your lungs, and eventually that powder has to come back up. So anyway, that's how I'm going to handle anti-maskers. There you go. So we're looking at a diagram, and the arrows mean that it upregulates the gene. And there are things on these diagrams that no one ever explains, and I have been trying to find good explanations for all of them. When you have the little bar going down, that means the gene is inhibited. And so you've got upregulators and you've got inhibitors. But the thing is, and I'm sure we're going to get into it in this paper, is that none of these things are like on-off switches. And nowhere in this diagram are you going to find an accumulator or a CPU or anything like that. So it's more like a massively parallel computing system that does not work in binary at all. So it's not a binary switch. None of these things are capable of turning it off. So. When
I was first looking at this, I thought I was looking at like an electrical circuit outlook or circuit diagram or something.
Yeah, and I actually ran into a program which I downloaded where you can actually build these things, but even the program itself is dense and difficult to use. But I'm hoping that they will have some things like the circle and trying to explain exactly what the rationale behind the different diagrams are, so they're a little bit hard to read. And then the other thing that was pointed out to me a while ago was that this is by Demeter, is that this is not just one cell. They oftentimes overlap gene regulatory networks from a number of different tissue types and a number of different regulatory networks onto one thing. So it looks like a much more complicated circuit than what in reality it is. So those are things that I'm hoping he's going to cover here. But you're on this line here, Scott, as GRN.
Okay, so as GRN researchers readily admit, we do not know how they, the GRNs, would behave even in a slightly different context, both abiotic and biotic, Wang and Buck. Still, the most serious problem with GRN models is that they misinterpret our ability to describe certain patterns of transcriptional activity in terms of Boolean operators as empirical proof that cis regulatory elements in the genome and their associated regulatory proteins causally interact in a perfectly reproducible deterministic manner. It is a blatant, even if often convenient, idealization to characterize molecular processes such as transcription and differentiation in terms of computable logic functions. And the reason, as I have already discussed, has to do with the scale at which they take place. Every single step in these processes, as with every biochemical reaction in the cell, relies upon probabilistic collision events between small numbers of randomly moving molecules, and these stochastic effects are amplified in regulatory cascades. Now, I want to picture here, going back to the Walmart analogy, basically it's a crowded Walmart on Christmas or whatever, and you're just bumping into people right and left, and some people may hang out together, and other people just may, go on and do something else. So I'm going to stick with the Walmart analogy as much as I can until y'all tell me that I'm ridiculous.
And to deviate from that a little bit, a lot of the people in there aren't shopping at Walmart at all.
Exactly. They're just walking through.
They're like they're looking for the Subway or the McDonald's that's inside.
Gotcha.
Immutable found the Subway.
That's good.
I did find the Subway, and now it's being occupied by me.
Good.
For science. Okay. This imposes absolute limits on the predictive capabilities of these models, and it is also why the analogy with electronic circuit, I feel like I'm saying stuff like nasally. Analogy with electronic circuit boards is inappropriate and frequently misleading. The second context in which the cellular circuitry metaphor is widely used is in the study of protein-protein interactions, particularly signal transduction pathways, which enable cells to make decisions such as whether to grow, differentiate, move, or die. Okay, I did that on purpose. The analogy between cells. I'm sorry, what?
Differentiate?
Yeah, that's my favorite word.
Okay.
The analogy between cell signaling and man-made machines, observe, is all pervasive, frequently adopting the imagery of electronic circuit boards. The reason, according to Duber et al., is that signal transduction pathways have information processing capabilities that rival computers. They can perform complex signal integration and switch states in a manner that retains memory or generate complex temporal behaviors such as oscillations. They are also presumed to be analogous in their organization. Just as electronic circuits are built of simpler components, cellular signaling circuits are composed from a modular toolkit of components. Specifically, transistors are replaced by proteins, and the electrons by phosphates and lipids. Figure 2.3 shows a typical example of how these pathways are represented in the literature.
I have a cat licking my hand while I'm scrolling.
Oh, that must be so pleasing.
Problematic.
Yeah, it is hard to resist the appeal of diagrams of this kind. Besides economically summarizing a wealth of information about how proteins or particular proteins interact by deliberately imitating the design charts of electronic circuits with their neat modular structure and their reassuring arrows, these attractive representations convey the comforting impression of understanding and control. However, in order for them to be as explanatorily useful as the diagrams of engineering, they must assume a very high degree of specificity in molecular interactions that are depicted as arrows. The trouble is that this assumption is not well supported empirically. A growing body of experimental evidence suggests that exquisite specificity in protein function is the exception rather than the rule. What a protein does in the cell is determined as much by the milieu it finds itself in as by its amino acid sequence.
Damn cat.
He bit you?
He started to bite me, and he was moving my hand when I was trying to highlight this. That's why I got the what.
Oh, gotcha.
Damn cat.
Yeah, they want to play when you're being serious. The same polypeptide chain can partake in a wide variety of cellular functions depending on where and when it is expressed, a rather unexpected phenomenon that has been dubbed moonlighting.
I'll write that down.
Moonlighting occurs because proteins in vivo actually interact with many more binding partners than was previously supposed. Nevertheless, reports of moonlighting become far less surprising when we bear in mind that most proteins are constantly colliding with one another as a result of being violently knocked about by Brownian forces. Once again, that crowded Walmart analogy.
Yeah.
This is all a consequence of the strange stochastic world that proteins inhabit by virtue of being so small.
Here we have another illustration. And the other problem with that is that the right protein has to bump into the other right thing in order for something to happen. And oftentimes things bump in that don't fit. And well, they do that stuff with what do you call them? Immutable equilibrium equations. Ooh.
Yeah, equilibrium constants.
Yeah. And there's it ends up being, and the other thing is that they can go one way, and then there is some percentage that will go the other way. It'll result at some equilibrium, and that's just the way chemistry works. But it's hard to envision what is really going on. And the other thing is that there are regulators that will just very, very loosely fit something, and that gene will be transcribed spuriously anyway at some small level. So digital circuits work with binary. It's either on or it's off. And that's why computers are so damned accurate when we write programs. Cells do not work that way at all. Cells have a total result. Either the cell going to live or the cell going to die.
Well, I mean, consider like the role of pharmaceuticals and stuff like that, right? If cells are so well designed, why is it that we can design pharmaceuticals like in the image or in like the electronic? Why can we mimic the electronic structure of like certain biomolecules so well that it actually inhibits cellular function, or a specific type of protein function? Because like the thing is, most proteins are good at doing one particular type of thing, but like you said, they're also having to deal with Brownian motion. They're also having to deal with regulators and inhibitors that are colliding into them constantly, and proteins are dynamic structures. Their geometry is ever changing, and so it is very much like a probability thing as to whether or not a specific reaction actually gets catalyzed or not.
Yeah, and everything has a side effect, or it has a list of side effects. We know that from medicine, but that also works at the natural cellular level, where every regulator has the side effect of having some loose fit with some place that it doesn't belong. And then every now and then that adds up to cell death or a problem for the cell. And every now and then that adds up to a new pathway. So it is deceptive to look at things this way, but still from the point of view of somebody who understands how a computer how the internals of a microprocessor work, this is nothing like that. I mean, it's only just vaguely resembles. There's, like I say, there's no accumulator. There's no 100% you turn this on and that's going to happen. There are no gates. It just doesn't work that way. oftentimes you're did I skip ahead or no? I skipped.
You
We're
kind of went
down
back.
here, right?
I think we yeah,
Yeah, we're down here. Okay.
right.
I just wanted to show the illustration. So, okay.
Okay, so I'm sorry, go ahead.
You can go ahead further.
Sure.
Further.
The fact that every protein in the cell can potentially associate with a large number of other proteins leads to a dazzling explosion of combinatorial possibilities that is exceedingly difficult to faithfully represent in diagrammatic form. The problem with circuit-like characterizations and representations is that signal transduction pathways do not exist as discrete, mutually exclusive subcellular compartments, given that the proteins that constitute them participate in many other pathways as well as in other altogether different cellular processes. Signaling cascades in the cell are deeply interconnected. They interact or crosstalk with one another in numerous ways. Even the most straightforward textbook representations of linear sequences of protein-protein interactions tend to mislead, as the simple causal links that are being depicted hide an underlying complexity that is often essential to explain real-world functionality. So much is swept under the rug. A dramatic illustration of this was provided by Dumont and colleagues, who, in an attempt to diagrammatically represent experimentally verified cross signalings between four distinct cascades, as reported in the literature during the previous 2 years, produced a remarkable yet utterly unreadable horror graph shown in Figure 2.4, in which, according to the authors, everything does everything to everything. You want to go down to 2.4?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So two. Oh my God.
This is scarier than spooky bed hair.
almost scary.
Almost.
Okay. Cross signalings between four different signal transduction cascades. Wow. Yeah.
And this is why analogies, when you're using them, or paradigms or whatever, have to leave information out.
Yep.
For the sake of amplifying one particular aspect, but to be stuck and in love with a particular analogy or paradigm becomes a mistake, because it provides, when you try to bring in information like Daniel Nicholson is, you get resistance from people who have other types of points they want to make with it that really aren't faithful to the science.
Yep.
When visualizing cellular circuit diagrams, it is important to understand that they represent only one of the many potential ways in which a given set of proteins can interact with one another. Tweak the intercellular or extracellular context ever so slightly, and the wiring between the proteins will change. And of course, we should not forget that there is no actual wiring physically connecting proteins as there is in a real electronic circuit. Instead, and this is again a consequence of their size, proteins exist in a fluid and dynamic environment in which they rely on probabilistic collision events with appropriate partners to reliably perform particular cellular functions at particular times. Diagrams such as Figure 2.3 wrongly imply that the proteins featured in them always form the same exact networks of interactions, which are envisioned as
Sorry. Sorry.
that's okay. It keeps me on my feet, keeps my brain working, keeps those neurons firing. In doing so, these diagrams prevent us from appreciating the vast spectrum of alternative interaction networks that the same set of proteins can and do form in different cells, and even in the same cell at different times. The majority of protein-protein interactions are contingent and opportunistic. There is no predetermined design that specifies the way in which the proteins in a cell interact, any more than there is a program of genetic instructions that is deterministically computed by the cell or the embryo. Conceptualizing protein-protein interactions as circuits may seem like a harmless heuristic simplification, but it can mislead us into thinking that we understand more than we actually do. Worse still, it can inadvertently direct our attention away from the factors and causal relations that may turn out to be most relevant for explaining the phenomena we are interested in.
Right. So one thing about that is the most important reason for creating those diagrams is so that we humans can start to decipher and pull apart the haystack and figure out whether there's something important in the haystack, right? To focus on one particular part of it and to disregard all the rest. The problem with doing that in practice is that oftentimes you may forget to check for some other little interaction or process. And I don't want to be condescending asshole, but I assume everybody knows what in vitro and in vitro and
In vivo?
In vivo is basically. So in vivo is in life and in vitro is in glass. So there's also the thing where until recently, almost all of these interactions had to be deciphered in glass in the laboratory in situations where we crystallized and sort of froze the cell in place. And just recently, we've come up with more dynamic ways of looking at things. And the more dynamic are the method we have in the laboratory of deciphering things, the more interactions we find. And every time we find, and I'm going to attack the creationists here, that as we go along, we find more and more smaller and smaller interactions. And every time they do, they write a paper on it. And every time they write a paper on it, the creationists say, oh my God, look at what God did here. He did something so complicated. He did it in so many different ways and from so many different angles that we can't even figure it out without, turning it into a simple diagram. So what we're finding is one of their favorite phrases. And they'll say, what we're finding is that God is so mysterious and so intelligent that he threw this pile of mud together and stirred it up and made it work like mud. And we're just now figuring it out. Well, what we're figuring out is that it's mud.
Yeah.
It's a big puddle of mud. The fact that we're alive at all is based on the wonders of natural selection. Because if the mud doesn't work, the cell dies. If the mud works, the cell survives. It's that simple.
Yeah.
And that's why I want to throw something out to one of our regular guests. That's why natural selection is kind of an overarching way to look at all of this, even at the cellular level. So do you agree with that, Immutable? Immutable is muted.
You have to be careful with how you phrase that because the way you formed it could boil down to a tautology.
You mean natural selection? Well, yeah, that is the stunning thing about it. It is a goddamn tautology. It is something that is so obvious that it's true. It's like we shouldn't even have to say it or have to be concerned about it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a tautology. There's nothing wrong that saying that you always fall down if you always fall down. What in the hell is that?
I think he's trimming his hair.
But
anyway,
the same thing though is that like a tautology doesn't provide anything of value about the system. But
unless it's true, unless it's something about the system that is so prevalent, so constant, so overarching that you always have to talk about it, and you do. Because the thing that you have to understand that if some mutation happens and it goes badly, then that cell is going to die, and that cell is not going to have offspring. Basically, it's not going to divide into another cell. It's going to stop right there. And you have to keep sometimes tautologies. I'm sure your mother told you not to run with scissors or something that was so obvious, that everybody should know it. Yet you have to say it out loud.
Well,
because that is the way it works.
The focus should be on how or why these things are the way they are, not the fact that they are.
Well, of course we focus on that. That's, after you state the tautology, and I know you agree with that little fucking weenie, but he's wrong. He's just dead wrong about this. Uh,
I mean, he's right.
Talk to some other biologists
The thing is,
and ask them if natural selection is an important part of the factor. Like for instance, immutable.
Yeah.
If you write a program, like I am writing for sorting out RNA interactions, okay, there is one overarching thing in this program, and that is the filter mechanism that either yields a result or doesn't yield a result. And that filtering mechanism is called natural selection, and it works at every level of reality. So,
yeah, I mean, I think the counter.
are you at a racetrack?
No, other cars are driving by. But I think the counter to Danny's, rhetoric is just say, look, natural selection isn't all there is. They're variables which, kind of determine the course of natural selection or contribute to what things are selected for or not.
Oh yeah,
right?
If you try to use, the complaint by Fodor is that if you use natural selection to explain why we have one trait and not another trait, then you are wrong, and you are just wrong if you try to do that. That isn't how natural selection is utilized. Natural selection determines what is selected against. And that is, and if you read papers that counter Fodor, that's exactly what they'll tell you. It's not, things are not selected for. That isn't how things come into being. You can have a linkage between two genes. One gene creates a better way to process sugar and creates a superior mechanism for respiration. Another gene makes very close to it, gives you a spotted nose. And if you look at the animal, it's got a spotted nose and it's really good at processing sugar, right? And so you can't use natural selection to tell the difference between those things or why the spotted nose got there. That's not what it's for. You use natural selection to determine whether the trait, the group of genes, is going to end up in the future or not. That's all you use it for. So it's just a and it's probably a good criticism because it gets us to those are called just so stories. When you look at a creature's spotted nose, and you might come up with a story that, the girls might have liked the males more if they had spotted noses, and you'd be full of shit because It's a just so story. And it turns out the reason that the thing has a spotted nose is because the gene is right next door to another gene that is important. But that does not deny that gene that's right next door is the one that did the selecting, basically. And mutations of it that did not work are the ones that are going to be selected against. So it's very important to keep that in mind.
And I think the fundamental nature of selection is that it's not like there's any one thing that's selected, that's being selected against. I mean, gene networks and how they regulate each other is a very dynamic process. So, I mean, it's hard to single out a single variable that really says, oh yeah, that's why that thing was selected against rather than not.
Yeah, there's more to the story. I mean, we're looking for the mechanisms, and the mechanisms involve things about the environment from the top down, and things about the organism itself. And the fact that, traits like a spotted nose would pop up are due to some stochastic, completely random mutation that had nothing to do with anything. And the whole package is what we're looking at. So, but it's not like we're going to quit using the idea of a filter, because a filter is very important in life. With no filter, you would end up with you wouldn't even be able to have a species, everything would be different. So anyway, okay, so we're on metaphor 3.
Well, aren't we saving that for part 3?
We could.
I thought the goal of this was to do analogy by analogy, or metaphor by metaphor.
Yeah, let's look ahead here. Okay, they're looking at molecular assemblies. Yeah, it'd be cool if we did a little more work on this, like psyllium, flagella. I mean, if you go Google, how did the ribosome evolve? How did the ion channels evolve? How did polymerase evolve? You will find thousands of papers on each of these little problems. And what the creationists like to Google is, what are the problems with evolution? Or how are the ways that evolution is wrong?
Or how many times does the word machine or factory occur in all these papers, and therefore there must be a factory maker and blah,
Right.
blah, blah, you know.
Yeah, let's take a look here. Factory.
Yeah, go up to that 2.3 or 2.4 diagram that we just saw, you know, with that table.
Look at how many times the machine is mentioned in this paper, so it must be a machine. Because this paper is a criticism of the idea that it's a machine.
Yeah.
Go figure.
That table I was referring to had a list of different, you know, the psyllium, flagellum, the ribose, and right across from it, it said factory or assembly line. And so, yeah, these are the favorite allegories that that our creationist friends have reified to say, oh, the cell is a machine, the ribosome is a factory, and counting the number of times that the word occurs, or the number of papers where it has been mentioned, but none of the papers that have cautioned against using those metaphors. They're just really in love with this particular representation of the cell as a machine.
Yep, because it points to a designer. And that's all. Oh, so okay, so there's only one more section left on this paper, right?
Oh, there is?
I think so, yes. 3, I think, is the last metaphor. So metaphor
nice.
3. Yeah, so
then we anyway, discussions. Oh no, there's metaphor 4.
No, there's 4. So okay, let's try to wrap it up next time with 3 and 4.
Sure.
Okay.
I'll take my vitamins.
We can do that. Okay, take your vitamins. And I know you have trouble with those D words, the deterministically.
Deterministically. I'll practice that in the mirror.
Yep. And let's see, what else? What else can we do here? Evolution of cis and trans. Okay, I wanted to show this first. Stop screen. Share screen. Chrome tab. Because I got this one right.
I was right. Okay, sorry.
I was right about this one. And where is it? Oh, my goodness. Why did I not find it? Oh, conclusions. I had it highlighted. Do you know where it is?
No, I don't know where it is. I don't know where the hell your mind you highlighted it.
Let's see. Oh, I don't know. Anyway, I wanted to show that cis and trans, what the meaning of cis and transregulatory. Transregulatory comes from another place. Cis is close by. And so cis regulatory mechanisms would likely be selected together by recombination, whereas the other ones would be could be selected differently for different organisms. Then the other thing was the difference between a motif and a domain. So motif is the overall three-dimensional structure, like a piece of the structure of a protein, and domains are those little tiny machines that actually do the work, like have some catalytic activity or something. And genes will frequently, because of alternative splicing, they will frequently have some motifs and not others, and sometimes they will get chopped up and they'll get duplicated, and they'll end up with a different combination of a number of different little domains that do something in an enzyme. So, and that is how evolution happens. Okay, that's it. That's all I got to say. Oh, and I was wrong about that one. Wrong. I had that backwards.
Yep.
Okay, guys, we'll wrap it up.
All right.
We'll wrap it up.
Okay, we're going undead. Goodbye, cruel world.
Thank you for all you who hung out in the chat.
All 8 of you.
All 8 of you, including Dessel, who's wanting me to
Dessel
respond
and-
to. He's wanting me
Oh.
to continue our mereological nihilism conversation.
Oh, we ought to do that sometime. That'll be interesting.
We had Lucifer Almighty. We had David in there, Laurie Hayes for a while, and of course, Spooky Bed Hair. Sorry,
Yes.
Spooky Bed Hair.
Spooky. Okay. Goodbye, guys. Goodbye, cruel world.